So hello again and welcome to today's webinar, Meaningful Conversations, which is going to be all about speaking and thinking well together within our workplace context. My name is Kerry-Ann Deer and I perform the role of Sector Sustainability Coordinator at Community Legal Services Legal Centres, Queensland. So before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're holding this webinar today. In Brisbane, where we are, this is the Turrbal and Jagera people. I wish to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the really important role that First Nations people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders continue to play in our society. As this webinar is being viewed by people across Queensland and throughout Australia, I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land throughout the country and extend a warm welcome to any First Nations Australians listening today. So today we're joined by Jan Ungerer from Insightful Communications organisation, and she's going to be talking to us about having optimal and meaningful communications at work, how we can create the right environment and equip ourselves to maximise the opportunities we have to speak and to listen and to communicate well with each other in our workplace environment or when we're doing our work roles. I'll let Jan tell you a little more about herself when I hand over in a moment. But today's webinar is being recorded and we'll have the recording available to download later today or tomorrow. The PowerPoints and other materials have already been emailed out to anyone who registered, and there may be a handout that Jan makes available, which we'll put into the section or email out to individuals. There are two ways that you could interact with us, and we encourage your interaction. First is to ask questions, and you'll be able to type your questions into the chat box, which you should find on the right-hand side of your computer. Otherwise, you can type a comment in. So there's a questions box and there's also a chat box. And we'll probably hold the questions until toward the end of the presentation, but feel free to comment or question as we proceed through. So I'm now going to hand over to Jan and I will be talking to you at the end of the session. But first of all, I probably should just tell you a little bit more about Jan, who is the Director of Insightful Communications, an organisation that supports many individuals, teams and workplaces in professional learning programs that develop and transform systems and challenge participants to think, how can we do bigger and better in our lives and in the lives of others, which is very salient to our work in the not-for-profit and charity sector. So we, of course, many of us assist the most vulnerable in society, and we know that at times communication can be difficult, and sometimes we can find ourselves unprepared for what we do encounter. So Jan's joining us on this webinar today to share some of her ideas around thinking and communicating well. Welcome, Jan.
Kerry-Ann, thank you so much, and thank you to the Community Legal Centres Queensland, along with everybody that's tuned in for today's conversation. Yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity, I guess, to share some of the work that I've been involved in over many years, working with teams and individuals, leaders, across kind of the health and community services. And I guess I became very interested in just what was it to kind of maximise our potential in the workplace so that we got the most out of ourselves and each other in order to get the most out of the work that we do in this sort of human services field. And I just like to also just I'm sitting in Bundjalung country down here just over the border in Tweed Heads, and it's a bit of a misty grey old day, but just like to pay my respects to the elders on the country that I am and sitting and talking from today. So, as Kerry-Ann said, I am Jan from Insightful Communications, and I guess what I'd like to do today and reiterate what Kerry-Ann said about we'll have opportunity. I've got a couple of questions throughout the presentation that I'd love if people were willing to just share some of their feedback, or you know, a bit of a one-word reflection when we get to the that section, and just to know that it is, you know, private and confidential. So please, be great to get your interaction throughout today's webinar. Meaningful conversations at work. So I've thought about the three areas that I guess we'll really kind of be covering, and that was kind of understanding more about the human condition and how we sort of show up. And how do we get ourselves ready? Some practical tools for staying, you know, just present, focused and energized, which of course then helps us become more intentional and deliberate in how we can go and move in and out of conversations with one another, with clients, with other stakeholders. And so that last area, you know, how do we get intentional and deliberate in how we kind of foster those environments that are really needed for meaningful conversations to occur? It's this notion of how do we kind of slow down to speed up, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment.
Hey, that sounds great, Jan. I like the idea of slowing down to speed up. And I know from experiencing some of your work that you've got a particularly practical and experiential approach, and knowledge and practice is power, that we know.
Absolutely.
And so I understand, you know, from experiencing your work, focusing on what is actually happening, you know, in the background with our physiology or our autonomic nervous system and in the body, the things that we don't often pay attention to and that can have really big benefits, take us out of that, you know, survival or thrive or you know, state of fight and flight into thriving. So
absolutely.
So, and I think I mentioned earlier, I alluded to the fact that some of our interactions in our sector can be quite challenging, and adding to this, that a significant focus of our work, not just in interacting with vulnerable people around their legal matters, but also around advocacy for people in courts or tribunals, where we really have to optimise our opportunities to speak well, can actually be quite anxiety provoking, and it's challenging to stay focused and calm, particularly with some of the unexpected turns that these type of encounters and proceedings can have. I remember doing conciliation conferences at the Industrial Commission, and you know, you have to be prepared, because at you know, the tap of a hammer, the commissioner can decide that we're going into a full-blown hearing, and you know, certainly that is not for the faint-hearted when you think you're just there to have a chat and try to get things sorted out. So I know that neuroscience has really demonstrated how we can become more resistant to the stress response. And I'm really keen to hear what you found in your work and what you teach as being that most useful in practice to help us keep it all together and communicate well.
Yes, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head, Kerry-Ann, you know, in terms of when we're kind of working with uncertainty or complexity, and we've got lots of work that needs to get done, and there's multiple perspectives and viewpoints, and you know, there's multiple ways in which we're sort of having to respond to the situations at hand. And I think what I have absolutely come to understand in my sort of work and working with frontline workers, leaders, and all people and teams and organisations in between, is this notion about, I have to be able to firstly fundamentally ask myself, am I safe? And once I can answer that question, then we know that we can kind of show up and kind of increase the likelihood of being able to sort of speak and think well in the moment, responding to whatever is kind of, you know, happening. And it's only when we're kind of psychologically, emotionally and relationally safe that our brains, as you say in that neuroscience research, that we know that our brains can operate in a bit of a reward state. And that way we can actually be more expansive and creative and flexible in our thinking and our behaviour. And absolutely, when when we find the sympathetic nervous system, you know, the cortisol's running in the brain, we're agitated, we do go into those sort of one of those three fight, flight, you know, freeze responses, and we're much more likely in those kinds of moments to work from this kind of, you know, self-preservation state. We have to, you know, keep ourselves safe. So we work from this self-preservation state. However, that starts to disconnect us from what's actually happening around us, and we can become, you know, defensive or even more agitated until we can sort of, you know, utilize those tools and tricks that we've got in our resources to kind of bring ourselves back. So what I want to sort of explore with everybody, you know, here today is this notion about if we can catch ourselves and notice the physiology that's happening in any given moment, and we can catch it early and often, then we're more likely to feel engaged and invoke this kind of connecting energy with each other. And that way, then we can kind of do this slowing down to speed up. We can actually get to the work at hand rather than spending so much of our time kind of in just sort of working to bring ourselves back into a state of groundedness and feeling centered. And I guess self-regulation through exercises such as the one that I'd like us to all sort of practice in a moment is that when we can regulate our emotions, we're going to be able to communicate our needs better, and we'll also stay focused and present in that moment. And reiterating, catching our stresses sort of early has that ripple effect, because then we're able to kind of contribute to this whole psychological safety across our teams and our workplaces, and we become sort of more intentional and deliberate in the ways that we just kind of, you know, show up together. So you'll all have, you know, your own personal practice or technique for bringing yourself back when you're feeling off centre. But I did want to explore this particular personal practice that many of the people that I've worked with in similar contexts to yours have shared that it really kind of resonated with them because it's 20 seconds. It's called the 20-second centering practice. So it takes 20 seconds of your time, and when it's practiced early and often, it just helps us kind of, you know, stay grounded in that moment, and then of course we're better connected to the present one. So you'll see on the slide there, you know, it's an opportunity to practice how we manage tension and conflict and using our own physiology. And when we can kind of shift, you know, to that center place, we change our body's posture and positioning of the three major areas, or the three brains, as we know, in the head, the heart, and of course in the gut, or the core. And by doing so, we're kind of just creating more space and opportunity for ourselves to just narrow the thinking, slow down, you know, power of the pause, in order to then to come back and optimize our potential in terms of the way we're speaking and thinking, because our brain is no longer in that sort of threat state, and we're just able to kind of talk to what is happening, and that is, you know, that's opportunity as well to kind of engage with our humility. You know, we don't have all the answers. You know, there are great uncertainties and changes happening for all of us all the time, and so what are those kind of personal practices and techniques that we can just use to help us? So what I would like to invite us all to do now is this 20-second centering practice. You'll appreciate that as I take you through it, it will take a little bit longer than 20 seconds, but I'll talk you through it once, and then once we've had a chance to practice it together, I'll invite you to just, wherever you are, if you're sitting or standing, to just kind of go through the 4 steps on your own, and we'll put a little bit of a 20-second, time frame around it. But the more you practice this strategy, this little technique, it just becomes that sort of part of your automatic response, because you notice your physiology, and then you can sort of go, oh, okay, it's time for me to just stop. What did I do in that 20-second centering practice? I'll go back to that, and just allow yourself some time and space to come back. So once we make that small adjustment and we kind of do this course correction, it just can make a really big difference over time to the well-being and performance of our teams and our workplaces. A good analogy that I've found a useful way to kind of think about this is when we are in planes, they actually fly in this kind of wiggly zigzag pattern. They don't necessarily fly in a straight line, and so they're constantly having to make these little course corrections early and often to stay on the right path. And so I like to kind of just use that analogy to kind of think about this course correction that we can invoke when we need to. All right, so I think we might start to get into this 20-second centering practice. What I'd like you to do, so wherever you are, standing or sitting, the first part of this is just to focus on your breath. So I'm going to ask you to just take an inhale, so just breathing in, and imagine the breath traveling from the base of your spine to the top of your head. As you inhale, see if you can lengthen your spine, and so just uplifting your posture. As you exhale slowly, imagine that breath traveling down the front of your body all the way to the earth. So if you're sitting, put your feet on the ground and just let that breath travel down the front of your body all the way to the earth below you. As you exhale, notice if your jaw or tongue or shoulders are tight or tense, and just start to relax and soften those areas. Now we're going to go into part 2. We're going to settle with gravity. So this notion of we're uplifting our energy, but at the same time, we're feeling gravity holding us to the ground. So feel the weight of your body and the weight of your arms, just sort of pulling your shoulders gently away from your ears. And allow gravity to settle you into your personal space and kind of connect, onto the ground beneath you. Step 3. This is about balancing your personal space. So ask yourself, is the back of my personal space balanced and even with the front of my personal space? Is the left side balanced and equal with the right? Is my sense of the space above me balanced and even with my sense of the space below me? So go ahead and just sort of expand that personal space, making those little small adjustments, and see if you can balance the different aspects. Now, step 4 is evoking a quality, and this quality is sort of represents something that you'd like to build or cultivate in yourself. And a quality in this sense is a practice of inquiry. So it's, what do I want to call on more in this moment? And it might be confidence, gratitude, resilience, assertiveness, courage. You'll see some of the example words that I've put in there. So ask yourself, if there were a little more gratitude in my body, what would that be like? So now that we've had a little bit of a run through, what I'd like you to do now is I'd just like you to sort of read through that again, because I recognise there's quite a few words and instructions there, but just simply read it. Take a little moment to read that, and then just in your own time, I'll give sort of a bit of space here. I'd just like you to kind of go through each of those 4 steps in your own way, in your own space, for the next, you know, little while. So here we go. Just try it out for yourself.
This is such a useful activity, Jan, and since reading your
Great.
slides and you know, it's interesting how that 20 seconds that you take for yourself and go through the 4 steps can actually be so valuable that what I actually found from practicing it too, that actually I was able to do it 2 or 3 times in 20 seconds and get to that quality of, you know, particularly, you know, I always reflected back to my most scary experiences being in the industrial commissions, you know, feeling that place of grace or of courage, but I think what was been most helpful is that in doing it, you're reclaiming back your personal space, that you know you might be in an uncertain situation, you might have an opponent, you know, there might be you know, a respondent, or you might be the applicant or the respondent, you know, on the other side of the table or of the courtroom, but that when you practice that, you know, is my left and my right balanced, and you know, my sense of space around me, I found it was helpful in putting like a little fence to saying that actually I'm safe here, and no matter what I hear or what the arguments are on the other side, it's not designed as a personal attack. And you know, I'm an advocate, and I can process the information that comes to me if I stay in my own quadrant. So I really like the way that you've broken that into 4 really accessible steps, and it makes
Fantastic.
that whole concept of mindfulness into a really, I guess, accessible practice. And it probably seems that these types of practices are not just relevant to preparing for difficult interactions, but they might actually, with practice as I've experienced, just help our bodies to be in a more toned state generally, you know, to keep those positive feedback loops going, those neural connections getting stronger, and having more positive emotions. You know, when you can think about courage or gratitude or joy, as you've suggested, if you've practiced that, it's much easier to actually feel it and bring that into the situation that you're in. So like imagine being in a traffic jam and practicing feeling courage or joy instead of frustration. And I've tried it, it does work. Or, you know, just rushing from that one meeting to another and everything's going, your mind's going, your body's going. But, you know, take that as a positive experience to say, well, no one's talking to me at the moment, no one's making demands, I'm in transit, but gee, what a state of gratitude I have right now. And there's lots more things, I'm sure other examples we can come up with that aren't our big stresses in life, but are those little things that cumulatively add up to you know, creating feelings of stress in our body.
Oh, definitely. No, look, I love that. And as you say, you know, everybody here will have their own examples and their own moments. And certainly we've been incredibly tested through this pandemic, and so these are those kinds of, yes, just small adjustments that we can all kind of make that really just over time really adds to that well-being aspect, as you say, and then being able to show up in all of these different contexts and places in our work spaces where we can just kind of draw on taking that pause, taking a moment, and you know, we kind of access greater empathy, and as I think what you were saying too, Kerry-Ann, you know, and we're more likely then also to have these we can go into these robust conversations because we're not having to protect ourselves. As you say, it's not an attack, or when things are coming at me, or there's agitation or frustration. I can see that for what it is, and I don't need to protect myself in that moment. I can just try to respond from that place of centeredness, you know, responding a bit more deliberately and wisely, and then I'm more likely to what, you know, comes out of my mouth next, you know, and the way I communicate will offer sort of more and better communication, and we're creating that sort of general sense of safety for myself, for the other person, for the team, for the group, you know, whatever the context is that we find ourselves in.
Yeah. So how important is safety? Yes. Like, you know, to keep cool, how important is it that we feel safe?
Well, I think it's the fundamental need, as I sort of said before. I think it's absolutely our fundamental need. We ask ourselves that question when we show up in any kind of social setting. Am I safe? And so if we can answer that to ourselves in that first instance, and we get more aware and we notice, you know, what our physiology is sort of doing in the head, heart, and core, us, you know, kind of applying that safety around us. And we'll talk a little bit about psychological safety in a moment, and, you know, how do we keep cool under pressure, because we know that these things, we've all been in situations we can get taken off our center very quickly, and it comes in a split second. But the more we kind of practice and have these tools and resources in our toolkit, we're just given more opportunity to make those small adjustments. So definitely, you know, it's fundamental to feel safe relationally, emotionally, psychologically, and then from that point, can we react and respond in the present moment to what's happening and what's in front of us, rather than you know, getting caught and getting more agitated, more defensive, or more anxiety. And
yeah,
so
I'm seeing so many intersections here with cultural safety too. So, you know, creating a psychologically safe environment is so parallel to creating a culturally safe environment for First Nations people to be interacting in our workplaces as well. I know that's a whole other topic, but I just see so many parallels about, you know, being able to feel relaxed, to be heard, to be safe, to be ourselves, to express who we are, if that's also part of our culture. So
absolutely.
I interrupted you.
No, not at all. I mean, we know that we're at our best when we're feeling relaxed and we're heard and we're safe to be ourselves, and we'll explore that a little bit as we go through. Before we kind of go to the next slide, I just wondered if there was anybody who might like to kind of just give us a one-word response in sort of anything that stood out for you, for, you know, while you were doing that 20-second centering practice. So remembering that, you know, your chat is no one else can see what you write, but it would be lovely if people just had one word that sort of described just anything that stood out for you during that little centering practice. I'll just give people an opportunity to have a go if you'd like to. What's one word?
So I'm happy to read some of the comments out, Jan, that we're getting through. So calming, prepared, quiet, being slowed down. Someone said they felt immediately calmed, being relaxed, readiness for the next thing. That's more than one word. They apologise, so that's cool. Centered, stillness, being balanced, Yeah, that was very consistent with my experience. Being
Fantastic.
present, I've heard that a few more times.
Yes,
yes. That postural alignment is so powerful, isn't it? And we've got some questions that we're going to talk to at the end about, you know, what is slowing down and what is balancing the core and the head. So I will save them for later.
Wonderful.
As we've asked them, but they're really important questions. And
wonderful. That's great.
And yes, someone's also said, yeah, does the feeling of safety get transferred to clients who are feeling unsafe? And I mean, sure you can answer that, Jan.
So good question.
Yeah.
Oh, some great questions. No, thank you. And let's make sure we give some opportunity for that to be some space for that at the end. So we might carry on to our next note and slide around this keeping cool under pressure. And this is a little process that we came up with, and it's around this catch, call, choose. So it's kind of, we start to get an indicator, or we notice something in our physiology. You know, for me, I start to get a bit flighty, you know, the heart starts to race, I get unfocused, you know, I start feeling unfocused, my thoughts go all over the place, I forget what I was going to say next. And so then I kind of give it a name, and I say to myself, there you are, you know, airhead, you know, you're up in your thoughts again, sort of racing to the next task, or snapping an instruction to, you know, my co-worker or somebody. So I give it a name, and then I can kind of know to come back and just for a minute, you know, take a breath, take a pause, practice the 20-second sort of centering process, and then off I go. You know, hopefully now I'm sort of better connected to the moment, you know, what I'm wanting to say, and of course I'm then able to communicate just much better. So that's a little process that some people might find useful too. That's catch, call, choose. We notice that thing that we do, we give it a name, call it out loud, and then of course we have this opportunity to kind of make a different choice about what we do next. And they've just been really useful processes, and I guess, you know, it's a mindfulness practice, but it's just something you call on in the moment, so you get really good at those first sort of indicators in your physiology, and then you can kind of go through this little process to keep cool, you know, when the pressure is on. So which kind of leads me really to the next slide that I have, because I think it's really important that we look just briefly at this notion of psychological safety in the workplace, so that we get this really good understanding and of how that sort of shows up in the work. And I can actually share this, as Kerry-Ann had mentioned early on, if people would like a copy of this PDF slide. This is from Neural Networks, and they are an emotional intelligence accreditor of the EQI model, which I am accredited in delivering. And they talk about this psychological safety, which was a term actually coined by a Harvard Business School professor, Amy Edmondson. And she talks about psychological safety as this belief that no one will be kind of punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. And you can see on the left, Neural Networks have got a definition there describing it as people's perceptions of the consequences of taking interpersonal risks in a particular context, such as a workplace. Psychological safety is a belief that that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. And I guess it's we've sort of done a lot of work with teams around this notion of what does that look and sound like when we're in a, psychologically safe environment. And what is it when psychological safety versus accountability? So you'll see there's a little slide, and it's, I apologise, it's probably small on your screen, but you've got an X and Y axis. And when we're sort of holding people accountable is essential for getting the most from people. But without the psychological safety bit, it can create an environment that's characterised by stress and anxiety. So where our psychological safety and our performance are in balance, we kind of can achieve this learning zone. So you'll see that if I've got high psychological safety and low accountability, I'm in the comfort zone. It's status quo. Things, are just they're predictable. When I've got low accountability and low psychological safety, I go into the apathy zone. I've tried to share many of my ideas, thoughts. I've questioned certain things, and it just falls on deaf ears. It might be that kind of scenario. And of course, if we've got high accountability, but we've got low psychological safety and it's not in balance, then I go into that stress and anxiety zone. However, when I've got high psychological safety and high accountability and they're balanced, I'm actually in a learning zone where I can do more kind of creative thinking, because I'm not afraid to I know that my ideas won't be shot down, or someone else isn't going to go in to a threat response, because we've sort of done our own check-in with ourselves first, and we're starting to kind of create that environment for psychological safety for everybody. And the ways in which we might foster psychological safety, on the right-hand side in that column, you'll see there's some sort of questions there, or some ideas about, it's a bit of a checklist. Have I articulated clearly why our work matters? Have I made sure that people know that I don't think I have all the answers? How often am I asking questions of others rather than just expressing my perspective? Do I acknowledge or thank somebody for bringing an idea or a question to me? So there's just, it's a nice little kind of checklist that we can use. We also know that when a team's got that high psychological safety, we feel safe to take risks, and because we're confident that there's no one on the team that's going to kind of punish or embarrass anyone else for admitting a mistake or asking a question or offering a new idea. And there's trust between us, so we don't feel the need to kind of put on a work face or, disguise kind of just, who we are. And psychological safety has absolutely been shown to increase the collective intelligence of a group and lead to improved performance. So if teams are to kind of learn together, we've got to be able to think together well, which requires that sort of developing the discipline of opening up, dialogue and discussion in productive, creative and sort of meaningful ways, where we get to sort of suspend, any assumptions, we share meaning, and of course we allow, new insights to develop, particularly when we're having to do thinking together around complex issues. Just for timing, I'm going to just also head to this next slide to just, I guess, make that point also about this trust. So it is absolutely the integral element. We know that trust builds trust. So when we start from a viewpoint of giving our trust freely and honestly, we see trust returned by others. So we create these environments that encourage, team learning. And if anybody's ever come across Patrick Lencioni's work of the 5 dysfunctions of a team, we know that trust is a foundational piece. Without trust, we can't have accountability or productivity. We need trust at the essence of that foundation in our teams. And if there's an absence of trust in teams. There's this invulnerability to kind of share that we don't know the answer, or we just don't know what to kind of think or do in that next context. We need the help and minds of others. So there's loads of humility and empathy for other that kind of comes into play here. And, you know, in short, this building a culture of sharing actually inspires teams to kind of speak up. We encourage people to sort of, you know, voice out their opinions and stories without fearing rejection and criticism, which then, of course, helps people feel safe enough to bond and to connect differently, to share their knowledge, and to be in that psychologically safe environment. And, you know, individuals need to be generous enough to share their personal values and contributions, whereas the team needs to be willing enough to see each contribution as an opportunity for growth. It doesn't sound so difficult, except generosity and empathy and willingness cannot actually be imposed. It can only be encouraged and nourished through good communication. And according to a recent Google experiment where they did, I think it was 184 teams that they interviewed, to feel psychologically safe at work was the #1 of how people got their work done, and that we should be free enough to share the things that scare us, you know, without fear or recrimination, and to talk about, you know, what's messy, and have those hard conversations, you know, with colleagues who might be driving us a little mad. And humility, I think, is the key, but we must have trust as the foundation for that to occur in our environment.
So Jan, it really kind of it's really something that it sounds to me like leadership has a big responsibility to foster, to set the culture for our work in teams, to, despite the fact we, you know, many of us work in hierarchical organisations, to be able to, when we're in a team, no matter what our role, to be able to have the confidence and the safety to say what we think, and not, you know, feel that we're going to sound stupid, because we know from all the research on diversity that we get much better outcomes when we have inclusive perspectives. We get ideas from outside of the, you know, thinking outside of the, thinking of a pool table here, but, you know, outside of the box. And that, but we know, you know, it's not easy, because this sort of stuff actually takes time to develop. And, you know, it's
absolutely
got that pressure on us to at work to look professional and hide our vulnerabilities and our fears and our outbursts and anxieties and insecurities. And I'm not saying that teams should be all about people being able to, you know, share that they're insecure about something, but or to talk about their vulnerabilities, but having that acknowledge that we may all be feeling this, or many of us may be experiencing these types of insecurities, but reassuring people it's a safe space to share seems to be the most important message to get across, or one of the most important messages.
Definitely, it's going back. It's having that. How do we get intentional and deliberate and create those sorts of environments? And you're right. It's none of this is simple or easy. But of course, we talk a lot, and we hear lots of teams talking about, you know, when I'm authentic, when I'm allowed to sort of be myself, there's kind of this connecting energy that we have in our teams, and so we can actually have those more robust conversations, because there's trust at the essence. It's at the foundation. It's, you know, we need to be sort of able to challenge. That's where good work also gets done. And you're right, it's not about sharing all vulnerabilities, but it is about creating safe spaces and environments in which people can just bring their curiosity. You know, we have to apply this sort of open heart, open mind intentionality to the way in which we speak and think. And so we've got to kind of have one that ability, that self kind of leadership piece about knowing our first indicators or signs when we're kind of getting a bit off centre, you know, noticing our physiology, having things in our toolkit, uplifting our energy, noticing our sort of space, adjusting, making those small course corrections and small adjustments. Then we're more likely, of course, to feel safe ourselves, which in turn allows others to feel safe. And we start to build those environments where people can just bring themselves into the moment of conversation, where it's not in threat. It's about, what do you know? What do I think? What do you know? So she talks about, and this is research that Amy Edmondson did, and you can look at TED Talk that she's done around this psychological safety. But she talks about it's absolutely critical when you've got uncertainty and interdependence, and so you frame the work as a learning experience. You know, you frame the work as a learning problem. You acknowledge your own fallibility. So you might make explicit that, yes, actually, there's lots of enormous uncertainty ahead. That's you know, we just acknowledge that. And then, of course, we have enormous interdependence when we're all in it together. So how do I sort of model curiosity to know what it is for you, know what it is for me, and for our team, and sort of work from that place. And I think, you know, that's how we set up that kind of environment.
So it's kind of contagious. It's sort of...
Absolutely.
Contagious containment is that when we've got a couple of people in our team who are able to model those kinds of behaviours, then that in itself becomes facilitative for others. And whether those people are leaders or you know, whether they're people who've done training or they've had, you know, life experience, that they kind of can get it grounded together. And, you know, I think we've probably all been in teams that crumble, and we've all been in teams that succeed. And you know, understanding that dynamic of bringing the calm back, bringing the safety back. I hear you. It's fascinating.
No, I love that. Contagious containment. I think that's a lovely way
I just made that up
to frame that. I like it. I think we should. Yeah, that's good. And yes, I now what you'll see on the slide is this, just some example phrases that can help us speak and think well together. So by making our small adjustments early and often, a manifestation of our contribution that is intentional and deliberate, then will help our conversations to kind of look and sound, you know, something like this. And I've just chosen a few that I have got from both people in the workplace and people that I have coached. And, you know, it's this thing about, I'd love to know what you think. So it's about, I'd love to know what you think. You know, this is where I'm coming from. I'd like to understand where you're coming from. What's been happening for you? How are you feeling about what's happening? And, you know, what are the things that are getting in our way or are getting in the way? And actually, what can I do to help? So you can see, just even in the language of some of these phrases, it's about, you know, that empathy, that humility, the appreciative language that means we're working for solution, you know, together, and these are some of the kind of core practices, I guess, for facilitating, you know, these great conversations and robust conversations. And that is that we apply really deep listening that's intentional, and we're using our empathy and that empathetic listening skills. We're looking at the multiple perspectives. How might it be from this person's view? And we know that in communication, it may not be just in the words, it's always in the how it's communicated. So I might speak the words, but if I'm holding and my physiology is telling you something different, that I'm stressed and I'm angry and I'm frustrated and the words, if I say those sort of phrases in the last slide, we know that communication is so much about the how it's delivered, the tone, the pitch, the vibe, I guess. So this listening piece is critical. We must listen for understanding rather than evaluating. we need to get really good at asking questions, ones that we don't have the answers for, and for solutions thinking, how do we work this out together? Which means we must have this kind of curiosity mindset and seek clarity, you know, connect others' views. I heard you say this. I'd love to know more about what you think, you know, around that. Could you help me, you know, understand more? And of course, just that constant testing assumptions, biases, and our own judgments that show up in the world as humans. You know, as humans we are, and so yes, it's not easy, but it actually really adds to the well-being and the optimal performance over time, when we can get really good at speaking and thinking well together.
So I love the open-endedness of that, of some of the questions on the previous slides. The one that I just remember is the what's getting in the way, and how can I help? And then when you went on to the next section of sort of saying, well, it's not really what you say, it's how you say it. You begin to get this rich context of, you know, the way that someone asks what's getting in the way could definitely be, you know, well, what's getting in the way of you know, you meeting that deadline? Or look, you know, is there anything getting in the way of, you know, you being able to complete this job? Or it's so depersonalized just by tone of voice. You know what I mean? Is something outside of you? Is there something that might be within my power and control, or that I need to understand, that can help you, you know, to become a more effective, you know, team member, or to deal with what's going on, you know, in your life? And then listening for understanding rather than evaluating, that just says it all. Like actually listening to the answer, and rather than weighing it up in a mathematical kind of way, just truly understanding what might be that person's situation. It just does provide for that rich context of interpersonal communication.
Oh, definitely, absolutely, and we just, you know, we all get really skilled. We can get much more skilled, I should say, at this, but we'll know that life will present something, and it will offer, you know, offer us a challenge and an opportunity to kind of put this stuff into practice. And I think that's when, for me, having those kind of just really quick catch, call, choose, you know, 20-second centering practice, they're the things that I can draw on and help me when I know that I'm caught, I'm off, you know. And in workplaces, yes, it's just it's so much about sharing that, you know, from my authentic kind of voice and authentic self.
Yeah, so true.
Kerry-Anne,
we've got so many questions, Jan. Can I, without putting you on the spot, I think this one that was asked early on in the piece is really valuable. I'm just trying to go back to it. The person says, you know, we'll be looking in more detail at what the core is compared to the head. And I think we know the expression being in our heads or living in our heads. How do you see kind of that relationship to the body, like coming out of the head, and the work that you've just shared with us?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Look, the way I like to sort of contextualize that for me is that it's when we're in our head, it's the thinking, it's the thought part, and the core, or the gut, if you like, which is where the third brain is that opportunity to kind of, we connect to something that is, it might be our intuition, people might call it, we kind of know it differently to just what our thoughts are telling us. And so we experience that, you know, we talk about the gut, that we had a sense of something. We may not have a thought that goes with it, but we had a sense that this was, you know, happening. And so I think about it in terms of that. It's the other part of the intuition that helps me kind of go, oh, something's here. I can't quite articulate it in my thinking yet. I can certainly feel, you know, in my physiology, there's something kind of, you know, inviting me and telling me and challenging me to kind of explore, and so remaining curious with that. But I think it's around the intuition piece. So when all of those, when we're doing things like repositioning our bodies in space, you know, when we're kind of engaging with that personal space aspect, we're kind of balancing the system, if you like. If you think of ourselves as a system, you know, head, heart, and center, head, heart, and gut, head, heart, and core. So it's that grounding, that centered, that knowing place, a sense of something. That's probably how I would describe it.
Yeah, I think we always had this kind of, you know, scientific assumption until maybe the last 5 to 10 years that our bodies just worked in the background, that we didn't, you know, have control over whether we, you know, were having a nervous reaction or whether we were in, you know, either state, that it was situational. We've learned so much more about the control we can have, but what the science has showed is it's not just a matter of choosing, it's a matter of practice. So the more we practice, once again, like any habit, it becomes, you know, much more easily entrenched in that relationship. What's my body doing, or what's my brain doing? How do I connect the two? So Jan, there was a question.
Small adjustments.
There was two questions that relate to sort of safety and culture, and I'm going to read them both because I think they relate. And one is about, you know, does the feeling of safety get transferred to clients who are feeling unsafe? And the other one, sorry, I just have to scroll down, is talking about. Sorry, did you hear me?
Sorry, can you? Oh, I'm just wondering if you can still see the slides because they just went off my screen. That's all.
Yeah, they're coming in front of us. Yeah, we've still got.
Okay, no problem. Great.
And so that transference of feelings of safety to clients, but then, you know, another question talks about the role of leadership and management, and saying, you know, observing what a big role they have in psychological safety, and what are some things that people in those positions of power can do to turn around a workplace culture when there is, you know, that more pervasive culture of mistrust, fear, when there's been intimidation or bullying or harassment. You know, how do we bring these techniques in, I guess, in a healing way, and in a way that is that, I'm going to use my term again, that contagious containment, whether it's to our clients or whether it's to our co-workers. You know, what if we're the only one practicing this at work? How can we spread the message? How can we get management on side?
You know, it's a really big question. It's a great question, and with 2 minutes to go, I'm not sure I'll do a very good job of speaking, you know, to it, but I'll do my best to speak well. I think, and I've got the slide psychological safety up here, and we can only ever start with ourselves. So we know that we cannot change someone else or how they are going to show up in any given context. But what we can do is lead ourselves, and that self-preservation, that self, you know, kind of regulation. If we get good at doing that for ourselves, it is kind of almost, and we start to model the kinds of questions and ways of speaking and listening and thinking that is modeling safety and openness and generosity and empathy and all of those sorts of elements, then if we start from the premise that trust builds trust, that what happens, and we don't even sometimes need to be cognitively, you know, thinking about this in our thoughts. We're actually having this connecting energy, and it's just the way in which humans will respond, so that we know from all the you know, I see somebody in stress, in great de-stress, just my own nervous system, I will go into, I will experience that through my empathy. I'll experience, you know, the mirror neurons, I will kind of experience that for the other person. But what I need to do is to come back to myself and regulate my own emotions and kind of come from that place where I've got the tricks and the resources in my toolkit to know, okay, this is how it is for this person. Now I've got a choice, because I can't change what's going to happen for them if they're coming at me with big energy, or they're cross, or I can only sort of stay centered to what's happening for me and try and talk from that and model that language that's really stressful, looks really, it sounds, and it's a really stressful thing that's happening right now, by the way in which I can see that's happening. I probably haven't got an answer for that, and I need to kind of find out what I think about that. So we kind of just, with time, I think, when we practice that self-regulation and managing our own emotions, we just get more skilled in then being able to show up in those kind of confronting and challenging contexts and environments, to just know, right, I can feel it, I just might need a moment, I need a moment before I say anything, or let me just, think about that and I'll get back to you, because I'm not sure about what you've said and how I think about that.
Absolutely. And you've answered a couple of the other questions that are in there already about what happens if somebody else isn't in a very psychologically safe state. How can I respond if I'm being triggered? And I think that we've always got that right. I mean, it doesn't apply if we're perhaps in a court situation or a more formal environment. And obviously we get a lot of training and experience before we're thrown into those situations, hopefully. But, when we are just in our regular workplace or in a transaction with a team, I think we have the right, if it's becoming too much, to take that time out for ourselves. And if it's just to psychologically switch off and turn off for a minute, or to physically say, I'm just going to take a quick break, a toilet break, or call a break for the whole team. Yes. Because my experience is, if you're feeling pretty churned up inside and the conversation is maybe a little more than robust, that many other people in the room may be feeling the same way and benefit from just that time out, where we can go back to, that self-regulation, breathing, having a cup of tea, perhaps connecting with someone in the hallway and saying, gee, it's a bit much in there, isn't it? And, reinforce each other's kind of perceptions, but, playing that calming role for each other too, to go back with perhaps a strategy, or after having centered ourselves for 20 seconds or so.
Yes, and yeah, for me, absolutely, Kerry-Ann, and I always go back to this, trust builds trust. I think when we start, and someone said to me once, if I could look at the other person as I would my own grandchild, if I imagined what that might be like. So when I'm in conversation, can I see that person as a human, just using the resources that they have in that moment? So how do I just have empathy, stay curious, and do what I need to do to kind of feel safe and stay safe, and model that psychological safety for others? And I think it's so much around, how might I just, if I can give trust freely and honestly, we actually see it returned by others. If I go into that meeting, and I'm not, and it could be for good reason, that in the past I felt very psychologically unsafe, but if I can just practice going in and going, well, actually I want to create something different here, and I'm a part of it. So how might I just give my trust, freely and honestly? So, and it's not about placating, it's about speaking my truth, speaking up in a way that I've done my check-ins, I've made those small adjustments, I've looked to what I need in the moment. I'm much more likely to then contribute something into that psychological safety, and hence make the environment itself feel safe, and therefore able to talk to what's happening.
Yeah, I think that's a really important takeaway message. Trust builds trust. And I think your other phrase, which you've used quite a few times, is catching early and often. And I think that's,
Yes.
you know, that's the repetition that the science is talking about. It's like you don't learn to become a pianist, a competent pianist, unless you practice, you practice regularly, and you do the same thing. And it's the same thing for our mental state. When we have a default position, of calm, of balance, it makes us much more resilient for those times that we are going to need to draw on we have our sympathetic nervous systems for a very good reason. We used to have to, run from tigers or bears or warring warriors on the other side. But there's still good reasons in modern society that we've got to have that as our default for stress. We need to get out of there, and we don't need to think about it too much. We need all our blood to go to our muscles, and we have to have a quick reaction. But just recognizing that that's how we're primed for any sort of stress is that question of, well, am I actually safe here? And if I'm safe, how can I bring myself back to a place where I can communicate effectively, and and the people around me can feel safe and communicate effectively as well.
Wonderful. And I just wanted to, I guess the last thing I want to say, on that 20-second centering practice, that evoking equality is quite powerful. And so as you articulated there, just that repetitiveness, that it's in the practice. But cultivating, what is it that I want to cultivate in my team next week or tomorrow, or in whatever context I might be going into? Is there a quality that actually I'd like to kind of, cultivate a little bit more? And what might that be? And what might that actually feel like to that feeling state? What will it feel like in my physiology, in my body? What I just imagining, using your imagination, what might that kind of feel like? And then of course, when I go to speak, how might that actually sound? What might that sound like? So they're just good questions to kind of ask ourselves. Yeah.
And that reflection afterwards. So you've rehearsed for your meeting. You've seen how you want it to go. You've perhaps even done some imagination about what you might say, and then it's happened. How important, and we might finish on this question, Jan, how important then is that reflectiveness afterwards to go, gee, what went well, what didn't go so well, and what do I need to do different next time?
Well, for me, I think it's the whole cycle, and I'm sure that all of us are working in that. We understand what it is to be, critically reflecting, both on our practice, in our work, and what's that? In theory, but our self-reflection. Yes, having some processes at the end of the day. I might do an evening reflection, and it might be, what did I do today that went really well? When did I get caught, and what happened? How might I do that differently next time? It might even just be a series of kind of checking in with what happened on the day, and then in the morning starting off with a bit of a morning intention. Well, actually, today I have this on. I'd like to bring my best self, and I'd like to speak with, humility, courage, and empathy. What's that going to look and sound like potentially? So I have a bit of a morning intention, but I also have an evening reflection. I found that a useful
way. And that's just as applicable to a staff meeting or a team meeting as it is to a personal intention during the day. It's setting up a frame, and you said it feedback loops to keep those neurons firing in the way that you would like them to work, and in I guess as a result forming positive habits and having positive experiences that reinforce each other.
Certainly giving ourselves, yes, the best chance, the best opportunity at speaking and thinking well. I recognise we've gone over, we've lost some people, but I just wanted to say, Kerry-Ann, it's been really, I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today. So thank you so much again for inviting me to come and talk about this practice of speaking and thinking well together. I think with 60 people still listening, there's been, a great deal of interest, Jan. So thank you. And quite a lot of people have said that they would really love a copy of the psychological safety brochure. So we'll endeavour to get that out. And No, that
And
sounds great. Well, thank you to everybody that has joined. Wonderful to have your interest and your engagement.
And I'm going to do my 20 seconds now before I go back to my desk and see what awaits. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jan.
Right.
And thanks to CLCQ and to Carly for helping with the tech support while I'm still in this learning role.
Couldn't have done it without it. No, that's great. Thanks again. Thanks,
Stay well, everybody.
Go well.
Take care.
Cheers,
Bye-bye.
Marianne. Thank you. Bye.